Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you." The mahogany desk gleamed under the lawyer's hands as she opened the envelope. My brother Loban sat forward, already calculating renovation costs for the ranch he'd never visited. He'd called me the help at Dad's funeral yesterday, called the 12 years I'd spent changing bedpans and managing medications playing nurse. The attorney cleared her throat, and I watched Loban's smirk freeze, then shatter like ice hitting concrete. Turns out Dad had been listening all along. "My name is Morgan Blake, and for 12 years I've been invisible in my own home. At 34, I should have been climbing corporate ladders, building my own life, maybe even starting a family. Instead, I spent my days managing supply chains for a mid-sized logistics firm in Denver, and my nights managing something far more complex, my father's declining health at our family ranch, Blake Ridge." The ranch sprawled across 40 acres of Colorado countryside, its weathered fence posts and 100-year-old barns standing as monuments to generations of Blake stubbornness. I'd grown up here, learned to ride horses before I could properly tie my shoes, helped Dad fix fences every summer until college pulled me away. But life has a way of circling back, doesn't it? I returned when Dad's first stroke hit, just until he's back on his feet. I told myself subletting my Denver apartment and moving into my childhood bedroom. That was 12 years ago. 12 years of 5:30 a.m. medication schedules, physical therapy appointments, insurance battles that made corporate negotiations look like child's play. 12 years of watching the strongest man I knew struggle to button his own shirt. My brother Loban. He stayed in California building his empire. Real estate development, he called it, though from what I could tell it mostly involved leveraging other people's money and attending wine tastings in Napa. He'd visit twice a year, Christmas and Dad's birthday, sweeping in with expensive gifts and grand stories about his latest deals. He'd pat Dad on the shoulder, slip me a check for expenses that barely covered a month's medications, and disappear again before the hard questions started. "Morgan's got it handled," he'd tell anyone who asked about Dad's care. "She's always been the caretaker type. Some people are meant for big things, others for support roles." Support role. That's what he called it when I turned down a promotion to VP because Dad's dialysis schedule conflicted with the travel requirements. Support role when I spent my savings on a wheelchair-accessible van after his second stroke. Support role when I learned to administer injections, monitor blood sugar, recognize the early signs of another mini-stroke before it became a major one. The ranch hands knew better. Miguel, who'd worked our land for 20 years, would shake his head whenever Loban's rental car kicked up dust in the driveway. "That boy got your daddy's looks," he'd tell me, "but you got his heart." I kept meticulous records. Every medical bill, every household expense, every hour spent in hospital waiting rooms. Not because I expected compensation, but because it gave me something to control when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Dad would catch me updating spreadsheets late at night and chuckle. "My little CO," he'd say, though his speech was slurred from the strokes, "running the most important business of all." Loban called me other things when he thought I couldn't hear. Daddy's little assistant was his favorite, usually accompanied by an eye roll when I'd remind him about Dad's medication schedule during his brief visits. He'd joke with his California friends on speakerphone about how some people just couldn't cut it in the real world and needed Daddy's protection. I let it slide. Every bitter comment, every dismissive gesture, every time he introduced me as his sister, who helps out at the ranch instead of the woman who'd kept our father alive and our family legacy from crumbling. Because at the end of the day, when Loban's tail lights disappeared down the ranch road, it was just Dad and me again, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple. "You know I see it all, Morgan," Dad told me once, his good hand covering mine. "Everything you've given up, everything you've done." "I haven't given up anything that matters," I'd replied, and I'd meant it. Even when the exhaustion felt bone deep, even when I caught glimpses of the life I might have had in my college friend's Facebook post, I meant it. But meaning it didn't make me blind to the irony. Loban, who couldn't tell you Dad's blood type or the name of his cardiologist, who'd never spent a single night watching Dad's oxygen levels, or cleaned up when his pride finally broke along with his body. Logan talked about our family legacy like he owned it, like birthright was determined by chromosomes rather than choices. He'd already started making plans I'd heard through the grapevine. Vineyard conversion was popular in Colorado these days. Lake Ridge wines had a nice ring to it. He told someone at Dad's doctor's office, not realizing the receptionist was my former classmate. The joke was on me, apparently, because while I'd been focused on keeping Dad alive, I'd forgotten that in the end, the living are the ones who write history, or so Logan thought. You'll be taking care of Morgan. Dad said those words to me on a particularly bad night 3 years into his illness. He'd just come home from a week-long hospital stay, and I was adjusting his pillows at 2:30 a.m. when the pain kept him from sleeping. His eyes, clouded by medication, but still sharp with love, held mine with an intensity that made me stop fussing with the blankets. Dad, don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. He shook his head slowly. I'm not talking about dying, sweetheart. I'm talking about living, about what comes after. You've given up so much. We've been through this. I interrupted gently. I'm where I want to be. I know. That's why you'll be taken care of. I assumed he meant emotionally, spiritually, the kind of care that came from knowing you'd done right by someone you loved. It never occurred to me he meant something more concrete. Dad was old-fashioned that way. He showed love through actions, not paperwork. Besides, everyone knew how these things worked. The son inherited the family business, the family land. That was just how it was done in ranching families. Logan certainly thought so. He'd started referring to Lake Ridge as his inheritance around year 5 of Dad's illness casually at first, then with increasing boldness. During one visit, I'd overheard him on the phone with someone, a business partner, maybe discussing future assets. The ranch. Oh, that's coming to me eventually, he'd said, lounging in Dad's leather chair in the study. 40 acres prime location. Dad's old school. You know, father to son, that whole thing. Morgan, she's just staying there temporarily, taking care of the old man. She's got her own career to get back to once. Well, you know, I'd frozen in the hallway, a tray of Dad's medications in my hands. My own career. As if the past years hadn't shown exactly where my priorities lay. As if temporary described 12-hour days, balancing spreadsheets and insulin schedules. The assumptions became more aggressive after Dad's first major health scare, the one that landed him in the ICU for 2 weeks. Logan flew in from California within hours, which should have touched me, but didn't because I quickly realized why he'd come. I'll handle all the decisions, he announced to the medical team, pulling out his phone to show them his driver's license. I'm the son, the next of kin. I'm his daughter, I said quietly, and his medical proxy. I have been managing his care. Morgan's been wonderful. Logan cut in smoothly, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. So helpful with the day-to-day stuff, but for the big decisions, the financial considerations, the insurance negotiations that require someone with business experience. The nurses exchanged glances. They knew me. I was the one who'd slept in that uncomfortable chair for nights on end, who knew which medications caused which side effects, who could read Dad's pain levels in the twitch of his jaw. But Logan stood there in his 1000 suit, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having to question your place in the world. She's just here for emotional support, he told Dr. Martinez, Dad's neurologist, during a care planning meeting. I'm the one with the business sense. I'll need copies of all the bills, all the insurance documentation for tax purposes. You understand? Emotional support, as if I hadn't negotiated with insurance companies for hours, hadn't learned to read EOS and appeal claim denials. As if the spreadsheets I maintained were just a nervous habit rather than the only thing standing between Dad and bankruptcy from medical debt. I tried to discuss it with Dad once after he stabilized. Maybe we should talk about getting some things in writing, I suggested carefully. Medical directives are one thing, but you don't need a paper to prove I love you, he said, patting my hand with his good one. That's for people who don't trust each other. We are not those people. It's not about trust, Dad. It's about making sure Logan's got his path, you've got yours. It'll all work out as it should. His tone suggested the conversation was over. Dad could be stubborn about things like that. Will's and formal arrangements, felt like admitting defeat to him, like acknowledging mortality in a way that daily medications and therapy sessions somehow didn't. Meanwhile, Logan had started visiting more frequently, but not out of concern for Dad's health. He'd arrive with measuring tapes, take photos of the property, walk the fence lines while talking on his phone about development potential and subdivision possibilities. "Just planning ahead," he'd say when I confronted him. "Someone has to think about the future of this place. You're so focused on the present, Morgan. But Dad won't need nursing forever. Then, what you planning to run a cattle operation by yourself?" The casual cruelty of it. "Dad won't need nursing forever" made my chest tight, as if the only two options were Dad's recovery or his death, with no acknowledgement of the 1,000 days in between that I'd navigated alone. "Besides," Logan continued, scrolling through his phone, "it's not like you've invested anything real in this place. Time, sure, but that's not the same as capital. I've got investors interested. This land could be worth millions if developed properly. Don't worry, I'll make sure you get a nice nest egg, enough to start over wherever you want." Start over as if the last 12 years were just a detour, not a destination. As if the routes I've regrown here could be pulled up as easily as the old fence posts Logan wanted to replace with subdivision markers. I looked at him, then really looked at him, my little brother who'd grown into a stranger. He stood in our father's house planning its demolition while Dad slept upstairs and felt entitled to every board and nail of it. "This is Dad's home," I said quietly. "It's our family's history." "History doesn't pay bills, Morgan." He slipped his phone back into his pocket. "But don't worry about it. When the time comes, I'll handle everything. You just keep doing what you do best, playing nurse." Playing nurse. As if what I did was make-believe, a child's game rather than the hardest role I'd ever undertaken. But I smiled and nodded because arguing with Logan was like arguing with the wind. Lots of noise, no substance, and you just ended up tired. That night I sat with Dad as he ate dinner, cutting his meat into manageable pieces, making sure he took his evening medications. He watched me with those knowing eyes of his. "You'll be taken care of," he said again, apropos of nothing. I squeezed his hand. "I know, Dad. I know." But I wondered if either of us really understood what that meant. The call came at 3:20 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been awake anyway, alerted by some sixth sense that Dad's breathing had changed. By the time the paramedics arrived, I'd already packed his medication list, insurance cards, and the small bag I kept ready by the door. This wasn't our first emergency run, but something felt different. "Final severe cardiac event," the ER doctor explained 6 hours later. "We've stabilized him, but his heart is working at about 20% capacity. He needs to consider arrangements." Arrangements. Such a clinical word for the unbearable task of acknowledging the end. Logan arrived that evening, breathless and annoyed. "I was in the middle of a major presentation," he said, brushing past me in the hospital corridor. "Couldn't this have waited until morning?" "Heart attacks don't check your calendar," I said wearily. He spent an hour with Dad, then emerged looking shaken. Not by Dad's condition, I realized, but by something Dad had said. "He keeps talking about taking care of things," Logan muttered, "making sure everything's in order." "You didn't say anything to him, did you?" "About the well?" "No," I said. "I've tried before, but he won't discuss it." Good. Logan straightened his tie. "No need to upset him. These things have a natural order." Dad was discharged a week later, weaker than I'd ever seen him. The doctors were blunt, months, maybe weeks. Hospice care was mentioned. I converted the downstairs study into a bedroom so he wouldn't have to manage stairs. Logan helped by standing in the doorway and suggesting I hire professionals. "I am a professional," I said, maneuvering the hospital bed through the door frame. 12 years of experience. You know what I mean? Real nurses. People who are trained for this. Untrained for this. My voice came out sharper than intended. "I know his routines, his preferences, his fine." Logan held up his hands. "I'm just saying, when you burn out, don't blame me." But I didn't burn out. I settled into the rhythm of Dad's final weeks like a musician returning to a familiar song. Morning medications at 6:00 a.m. Breakfast, soft foods. Now his swallowing wasn't what it used to be. Physical therapy exercises, though we both knew they were more about dignity than improvement. Afternoons on the porch, when he felt strong enough, wrapped in the quilt his mother had made, watching the cattle graze. "Morgan," he said one afternoon, his voice barely above a whisper, "my desk, bottom drawer after." I nodded, not trusting my voice. After. We both knew what he meant. That's when Logan decided to throw his fundraiser. "It's perfect," he announced, arriving unannounced with a van full of party rental catalogs. "A legacy event. Celebrate Lake Ridge past, present, and future. We'll invite all Dad's old friends. The whole community. Show them the family legacy continues." "Dad needs quiet," I protested. "The doctor said one afternoon would kill him." Logan waved off my concerns. "Besides, it's what he would want, to see the ranch full of life again. What Dad wanted was to die peacefully in his own home, not be propped up like a museum exhibit for Logan's networking opportunity." But Logan had already started making calls, dropping the Blake name like currency. The fundraiser, for what cause I never did figure out, was a disaster. 200 people trampling through the ranch, strangers posing for photos with our barn, Logan giving tours of what he called the future event space. Dad lasted an hour before I wheeled him back inside, his face gray with exhaustion. Quite a party he managed, trying to smile. "I'm so sorry, Dad." I tried to stop him. "No." His hand found mine grip still surprisingly strong. "Let him have his show. You and I, we know what really matters." 2 weeks later, on a quiet Thursday morning, Dad passed away. I was with him holding his hand, telling him about the sunrise painting the mountains gold. It was peaceful. It was right. It was everything Logan's circus hadn't been. Logan arrived that afternoon and immediately took charge. "I'll handle the funeral arrangements," he announced, pulling out his phone. "I know people. We'll make it an event to remember." "Dad wanted simple," I said, still numb. "He told me he's gone." "Morgan." Logan's voice was gentler than usual, but firm. "The funeral isn't for him. It's for his legacy, for the family name. He wanted a quiet goodbye," I insisted, remembering Dad's whispered wishes during those final days. Logan looked at me with something almost like pity. "He wanted a legacy. I'll handle it." And handle it he did. The funeral became another production. Politicians Logan had donated to business associates who'd never met Dad, a string quartet playing songs Dad would have hated. I sat in the front row watching Logan deliver a eulogy about the Blake pioneering spirit and carrying the torch forward, and felt like I was at a stranger's funeral. Miguel found me afterward standing by Dad's grave after everyone else had left for the reception Logan had organized at the country club. "Your father," he said quietly. "He would have liked this better. Just you and him and the mountains." I nodded, unable to speak. Miguel patted my shoulder and walked away, leaving me alone with Dad one last time. That night, I sat in the empty house, listening to the echoes of 12 years of care. The oxygen machine was silent, the medication timers disabled, the hospital bed already removed. Logan had been efficient about that at least. I thought about the bottom drawer of Dad's desk, but couldn't bring myself to open it. Not yet. Tomorrow, maybe after the will reading, after Logan's plans became official, after I figured out where to go next. Because Logan was right about one thing: without Dad to care for, what was I doing here, playing nurse to an empty house, pretending I belonged on land that was about to become Blake Ridge Wines or Blake Estates or whatever market-tested name Logan had chosen? I poured myself a glass of Dad's whiskey, the good stuff he'd been saving for a special occasion that never came, and raised it to his empty chair. "You'll be taken care of," I whispered to the silence, hoping he'd meant more than just memories and good intentions. Tomorrow I'd find out. The law offices of Garvey and Associates occupied a restored Victorian in downtown Denver. I arrived at 9:45 a.m. for the 10:00 reading, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to Dad's funeral. Logan was already there, sprawled in a leather chair, typing on his phone. "Morning, sis," he said without looking up. "Sleep well in that big empty house." I didn't answer. MS. Garvey's assistant offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. My hands needed something to hold. Logan had brought reinforcements. A man in a navy suit sat beside him. A real estate agent, judging by the folder of comps he was reviewing. They'd been discussing square footage and market values in low voices, when I walked in. Jim Thornton. The man introduced himself, standing to shake my hand. Logan's brought me on to assess the property value. Gorgeous land. Going to make beautiful home sites. The will hasn't been read yet, I said quietly. Formality, Logan assured him. Jim's just here to help us move quickly. Strike while the market's hot, you know. MS. Garvey entered precisely at 10, a slim woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She'd been Dad's attorney for 30 years. She nodded to both of us, her expression unreadable. Shall we begin? She settled behind her desk, placing a folder and a sealed envelope before her. First, I want to express my condolences. Roy was a good man. Thank you, I managed. Logan made an impatient gesture. The will is straightforward, Miss Garvey continued. Roy updated it 10 years ago, shortly after his first stroke. She opened the folder. The bulk of the estate, the ranch, the cattle operation, all associated assets passes to Logan Blake. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd expected them. Logan leaned back, a small smile playing at his lips. Of course, father to son, the natural order. There are some specific bequests, MS. Garvey continued. Morgan receives Roy's personal effects, his truck, and a cash amount of $50,000. $50,000. It would cover maybe 3 months of the medical bills I'd paid over the years. Logan's smile widened. Additionally, MS. Garvey said, there is this. She held up the sealed envelope. Roy left it with me 2 months ago, with instructions to present it during the will reading. Logan's smile faltered slightly. What is it? I don't know. He asked me to keep it sealed. She handed it to me. It's addressed to you, Morgan. My name was written across the front in Dad's shaky handwriting. Inside, I could feel something else. Another envelope. It seemed legalized. Well, open it, Logan said. Probably some sentimental letter. Dad always was emotional. At the end, I broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was indeed a letter and another sealed envelope marked for MS. Garvey. I read Dad's letter silently first. My dearest Morgan. By now Elaine has read the original will. I imagine Logan is pleased. Let him be for another moment. You always were the patient one. The envelope enclosed contains documents I prepared with Elaine's help 2 months ago. I was of sound mind. We made sure of that. 3 doctors confirmed it in writing. You asked me once to put things in writing. I told you we didn't need papers between us. I was wrong. Love might not need papers, but justice does. You gave me 12 years. You gave me dignity when my body failed. You gave up your life so I could keep mine. Logan gave me 2 visits a year and a view of what my legacy meant to him. Dollar signs and subdivision plots. You'll be taking care of my daughter as you took care of me. All my love, Dad. Well, Logan demanded, what does it say? I handed the second envelope to MS. Garvey. He says this is for you. She opened it carefully, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to surprise. This is a quartile properly executed witnessed. She looked up. This completely supersedes the original will. But Logan shot to his feet. That's impossible. He wasn't. He was sick, confused. The codal is accompanied by cognitive evaluations from 3 separate physicians, MS. Garvey said calmly, I'll confirm Roy was of sound mind when this was executed. Would you like me to read it? Logan sank back into his chair. The real estate agent quietly closed his folder. The courtesan revokes all previous testamentary dispositions. MS. Garvey read. The entire estate, Blake Ridge Ranch, all buildings and improvements, the cattle operation, all equipment, and all financial assets are left to Morgan Blake. The silence was deafening. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This couldn't be real. Furthermore, MS. Garvey continued. Logan Blake receives a specific bequest of $10,000 described as the graduation gift I never gave him when he was too busy to attend his own graduation party. This is Logan exploded. He wasn't in his right mind. She manipulated him, isolated him. I have 12 years of documentation showing Morgan as Roy's primary caregiver, Miss Garvey said evenly. During which time you visited, she consulted her notes. 17 times total. Would you like me to read the visitor logs from the hospital? Roy kept meticulous records. The post-funeral dinner was at the ranch that evening. Logan had arranged it before the will reading back when he'd expected to be hosting as the new owner. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. He stood in the living room holding court with his business associates, a glass of whiskey in hand. As the guests settled, he raised his glass. To Roy Blake, he announced, a man who built something from nothing, who understood that land like this needs vision to reach its potential. He looked directly at me. I've been working with some investors on plans for this place. Sustainable development, smart growth, turn this old ranch into something that actually contributes to the economy. Logan, I warned quietly. He ignored me. My sister here, she's been incredible. Really. 12 years of dedication. That's why I want to make her an offer. He smiled magnanimously. Morgan, I know today was unexpected, but I want you to know you'll always have a place here. I'll need someone to manage the transition, handle the day-to-day while we develop. I'll pay you well a proper salary. You like stability, right? You can keep doing what you already do, just professionally. The room was watching us. Dad's friends, ranch hands, neighbors who'd known our family for generations. They'd all assumed Logan would inherit too. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. You want to pay me, I said slowly, to be a caretaker on my own land. Well, that's still being discussed, Logan said smoothly. The will situation is complicated. Dad wasn't well at the end. But regardless of how that plays out, I want you taken care of. Monthly salary, benefits, the works. You could finally have a real job. A real job. After 12 years of the hardest work I'd ever done, after nights spent monitoring oxygen levels and days spent fighting insurance companies. After giving up my apartment, my promotions, my entire life to keep our father alive and our family legacy intact. I set down my untouched wine glass and stood. The room fell silent. Thank you for coming, I said to the assembled guests. My father would have appreciated your presence, but I think it's time for everyone to go home. Morgan, Logan started. Especially you, I said, meeting his eyes. This is my house now, my land, my legacy, and you're no longer welcome here. The silence was absolute. Logan's face went from red to white and back again. This isn't over, he said quietly, dangerously. I'll contest it. No judge will believe Dad was competent. Then I'll see you in court. I walked to the door and opened it. Good night, Logan. The guests filed out quietly, some murmuring condolences, others just escaping the awkwardness. Logan left last, Jim Thornton trailing behind him, both their grand plans deflated. I closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to breathe. From the kitchen, Miguel emerged. He'd been helping with the dinner service. Your father, he said, a small smile on his weathered face. He always said you were the smart one. I thought about Dad's letter now tucked safely in my pocket. About 12 years of sacrifice finally recognized, about justice served not with fanfare, but with properly witnessed documents. No, I said he was the smart one. He just waited until the end to prove it. The family gathered in Dad's study 3 days later for the formal reading of the courtesil. Ms. Garvey had requested we meet here rather than her office. Something about the documents requiring verification against Dad's personal records. The wood-paneled walls, lined with ledgers dating back to my grandfather's time, seemed to watch us with silent judgment. Logan brought a lawyer this time, a sharp-featured woman named Diane Castellanos, who specialized in estate litigation. I came alone carrying the box from Dad's bottom drawer that I'd finally opened. Inside were medical records, financial statements, and 12 years' worth of daily logs. I'd kept a habit that had started as medical necessity and became something more. Let's review the codal properly. Miss Garvey began adjusting her reading glasses. She opened the envelope with careful precision, as if the documents inside were fragile as old parchment. This courtesil was executed on March 15th, 2 months before Roy's passing. When he was heavily medicated, Castellanos interjected, hardly conducive to sound decision-making. On the contrary, Ms. Garvey replied smoothly. Roy specifically scheduled the signing for a day when he was between medication cycles. The cognitive evaluations were performed that morning. Would you like to see the results? She spread 3 separate medical evaluations across the desk. Each one confirmed Dad's mental acuity, his understanding of his assets, and his clear intent regarding their disposition. Furthermore, Ms. Garvey continued, the cortisol was witnessed by Dr. Patricia Hoffman, Roy's neurologist, Pastor Michael Brennan, and Judge Catherine Reeves, who I might add is a family friend of 40 years standing. Are you suggesting all 3 conspired to defraud? Logan's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. Morgan had 12 years to influence him. Classic case of undue influence. Let me read you the specific language, Ms. Garvey interrupted. I, Roy Blake, being of sound and disposing mind, do hereby revoke all previous wills, and declare this to be my final testamentary intent. The ranch known as Blake Ridge, including all land, buildings, equipment, and operations, shall pass in its entirety to my daughter, Morgan Blake. She paused, letting the words settle in the room like dust motes in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. This decision, she continued reading, reflects 12 years of devoted care during which Morgan sacrificed her own career advancement and personal life to ensure my dignity and comfort. She has proven herself the true heir to Blake Ridge through action rather than assumption. Pretty words, Castellanos said, but the law recognizes traditional inheritance patterns. Father to son has precedent. The law recognizes a person's right to dispose of their property as they see fit, Miss Garvey countered. But if you'd like precedent, let me continue reading. She turned to the 2nd page. To my son, Logan Blake, I leave the sum of $10,000. This represents the graduation gift I intended to give him upon completion of his MBA, which he was too busy to collect in person. I'd have watched him build his life in California, pursuing his own dreams without obligation to family or land. I honor that choice by not burdening him with a legacy he never wanted until it had monetary value. The silence was sharp enough to cut. Logan's face had gone pale, then flushed deep red. There's more, Miss Garvey said. I am aware Logan may contest this will. He has, after all, spent the last several years telling anyone who would listen about his plans for Blake Ridge. Vineyards, subdivisions, event spaces, everything but what this land has been for 5 generations, a working ranch and a family home. He wasn't Logan started. Therefore, Ms. Garvey read over him, this cortisol includes the following provision. Any beneficiary who contests this will shall forfeit all rights and bequests herein. This includes the $10,000 designated for Logan. Challenge my final wishes and you receive nothing. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. I watched my brother's face cycle through emotions, rage, disbelief, calculation. His lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. This is ridiculous. Logan finally exploded. A non-contest clause. What is this? The Middle Ages. It's perfectly legal in Colorado, Miss Garvey said mildly, and given the careful documentation of Roy's mental state, the multiple witnesses and the detailed reasoning provided, I'd say any challenge would be inadvisable. You don't understand, Logan said, turning to me. I had investors lined up, contracts in negotiation. This land could be worth millions. This land is worth exactly what it's always been worth, I said quietly, speaking for the first time. Its home, its heritage. It's 5 generations of Blakes who work this soil. You sound just like him, Logan spat. Sentimental nonsense. You can't run a ranch, Morgan. You've been a glorified nurse for over a decade. What do you know about cattle, about land management? I opened the box I'd brought and pulled out a ledger. Breeding records for the last 12 years. Every calf born, every bloodline tracked. Another ledger. Pasture rotation schedules. Soil tests. Water table monitoring. A thick folder. Financial records. Did you know Dad taught me the books? I've been managing the ranch accounts for 8 years, while I built a real business. While you built castles in the air with other people's money, I countered. I'd seen your LinkedIn loan. 5 ventures in 10 years. All folded. Always someone else's fault. Never yours. Enough, Ms. Garvey said gently. The cortisol is clear. Morgan inherits Blake Ridge. Logan, you have a choice. Accept the $10,000 and walk away or challenge and risk everything. Castanos whispered urgently to Logan again. I caught fragments, strong documentation, non-contest enforcement, minimal grounds. Logan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow now, deflated. "Actually, it is," Miss Garvey said. "You have 30 days to formally accept our contest. I'd encourage you to think carefully." Your father did. Logan stormed out, Castellanos hurrying after him. Through the window, I watched his rental car spray gravel as he peeled down the drive. Miss Garvey began gathering her papers. "Your father came to me in January," she said quietly. "He knew Logan had been making plans, talking to developers. He even caught him photographing survey markers. That's when Roy decided to put everything in writing." "Why didn't he tell me?" She smiled. "He said you had enough to worry about. Besides, he wanted to see Logan's true colors, whether he'd come around once Roy's health declined further. Show some genuine care. Instead, Logan threw a party. I finished. Roy called me the next day, said that confirmed what he needed to know." She closed her briefcase. "He loved both his children, Morgan, but he knew who loved Blake Ridge. More importantly, he knew who Blake Ridge needed." After she left, I sat alone in Dad's study, surrounded by the history of our family. 5 generations of careful records, patient building, steady growth. Logan saw dollar signs. I saw decades of dorn feedings, fence repairs, calculated risks, and careful stewardship. I pulled out Dad's final letter again, reading the postscript I hadn't shared with anyone. "P.S. The Red Ledger, 3rd shelf, your great G. Grandin Moffett's journal. Read it when you doubt yourself. You come from a long line of strong women who held this land together. Now it's your turn." I found the journal, its leather cover soft with age. Inside, in faded ink, my great G. Grandin Moffett had written, "The land doesn't care if you're son or daughter. It only cares that you show up." I'd shown up every day for 12 years. And now, finally, the land was mine to tend. 2 weeks passed in relative quiet. I threw myself into ranch work, rising at 5:00 a.m. to check the cattle meeting with Miguel about fence repairs, reviewing accounts that had been neglected during Dad's final months. The familiar rhythm soothed my grief, gave structure to days that felt too empty without medication schedules and doctor appointments. Then Castellanos called. "MS. Blake, this is Diane Castellanos. I'm calling as a courtesy to inform you that Logan will be filing a formal contest to the will." My stomach dropped, even though I'd expected this. "On what grounds?" "Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, fraud." She rattled off the accusations like items on a grocery list. "We have evidence that you isolated Roy from his son, manipulated him during vulnerable moments, and potentially forged documents." "That's ridiculous. I'm required to advise you to seek legal representation," she continued. "Have a good day." The line went dead. I immediately called MS. "Garvey, he's bluffing," she said after I explained. "Remember the non-contest clause. If he proceeds, he forfeits everything. Can he win? A pause. The documentation is airtight, but litigation is expensive, time-consuming. He's probably hoping you'll settle rather than fight." Settle. The word tasted bitter. Offer him a buyout. Some percentage of the estate value. Make him go away. Dad didn't want that. No, she agreed. He didn't. Logan's campaign began the next day. First came the cease and desist letter claiming I was illegally occupying disputed property. Then the forensic accountant demanding 12 years of financial records. He wanted proof of every penny spent, every check written, every medical decision made. I provided it all. Boxes and boxes of meticulous documentation, the paper trail of a dozen years of devotion, receipts for medications I'd paid for out of pocket, timesheets showing 16-hour days, medical reports detailing Dad's care requirements and my training to meet them. But Logan wasn't satisfied. He hired a private investigator who started interviewing neighbors, ranch hands, anyone who'd known our family, looking for dirt for any sign I'd manipulated Dad or mismanaged his care. The investigator found nothing because there was nothing to find. Instead, witness after witness confirmed what I already knew. I'd been there. Logan had it. 3 weeks into this circus, Miss Garvey called with news. "Logan's attorney has requested a meeting." They want to discuss the non-contest clause. We met again in Dad's study. Logan looked haggarded. His California tan faded to gray. Castellanos maintained her poker face, but I caught tension in her shoulders. We've reviewed the quartal thoroughly, Castellanos began. The non-contest clause appears comprehensive. It's bulletproof, MS. Garvey said pleasantly. Roy was very specific. Any challenge to a will through any legal mechanism triggers forfeit. That's unconscionable, Logan burst out. You can't strip someone of their birthright for asking questions. It's not a birthright, I said quietly. It's a gift. One Dad chose to give based on merit, not chromosomes. You turned him against me. You turned yourself against him, I countered. Every visit where you measured windows for replacement. Every call where you discussed maximizing asset potential. Every time you called me the help when you thought I couldn't hear. That's not January 10th, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. You told Jim Thornton, and I quote, Morgan's just the placeholder. Once Dad's gone, we can finally monetize this waste of space. Logan's face went white. You recorded, no, Jim. Thornton developed a conscience and called Miss Garvey. Seems he felt uncomfortable with your plans to demolish a historic property. She has his sworn affidavit. Castellanos leaned forward. My client is prepared to drop the contest in exchange for a settlement, say 20% of the estate value. No, MS. Garvey and I said simultaneously. 10 mind, 10%. Let me be clear. MS. Garvey said if Logan formally files any contest, he triggers the non-contest clause. He loses the $10,000. He gets nothing. Zero. That's not a negotiating position. That's Colorado law. Furthermore, she continued, pulling out a thick folder. During our research, we discovered some interesting facts about Logan's business dealings. Apparently, he's been pre-selling investment opportunities in Blake Ridge development, taking deposits for lots that don't exist on land he doesn't own. That's Logan started. Fraud, MS. Garvey finished. Several of his investors have already contacted us about recovering their deposits. We'd advised them to contact the district attorney. The room fell silent. Logan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. So, here's what's going to happen, MS. Garvey said, her voice gentle but firm. Logan will formally accept the terms of the will. He'll take his $10,000. He'll return any deposits collected for Blake Ridge development, and he'll have no further claim on this property. Or, Castellanos asked, or we file fraud charges, trigger the non-contest clause, and Logan spends the next several years in courtrooms explaining why he sold shares in property he didn't own. I watched my brother crumble. The golden boy, who'd always landed on his feet, had finally run out of runway. This is your fault, he said to me, his voice roar. If you just stayed in your place. My place? I stood 12 years of silence finally breaking. My place was beside Dad's bed at 3:00 a.m. when his oxygen dropped. My place was in hospital waiting rooms, insurance offices, pharmacy lines at midnight. My place was here, keeping this ranch running while you played mobile with imaginary assets. I was building something. You were building nothing. The words erupted from somewhere deep. Every venture, every scheme built on someone else's foundation, someone else's money, someone else's work. You know what? I'd build trust. One day at a time, one medication at a time, one hard choice after another. Morgan, Miss Garvey said gently. I took a breath. Sign the acceptance, Logan. Take the money. It's more than you gave Dad in 12 years combined. Logan looked between us. His lawyer, who'd clearly advised him he couldn't win. Miss Garvey, who held his future in her filed documents, and me, his sister, who'd become a stranger by staying exactly who she'd always been. Fine, he said finally. Draw up the papers. Miss Garvey already had them ready. Of course she did. Dad had taught us both to plan ahead, but only one of us had learned the lesson. Logan signed with sharp, angry strokes. Acceptance of the will's terms. Agreement to the $10,000 bequest. Acknowledgement of no further claims on Blake Ridge or any Blake family assets. We'll cut the check within 5 business days, MS. Garvey said. Logan stood to leave, then turned back. You know what the funny thing is? I actually thought I was honoring him, taking this old place and making it profitable, making it matter. It always mattered, I said. You just couldn't see it. He left without another word. Castellanos gathered her papers and followed her heels, clicking sharp judgment on the hardwood. MS. Garvey and I sat in the silence that followed. Your father would be proud, she said finally. Would he? I wasn't so sure. His sons just signed away their relationship over money and land. No, she corrected gently. His son signed away a relationship he'd already abandoned. You just refused to let him profit from it. She left me with copies of all the documents, Logan's signature, making my inheritance official in every way that mattered. I sat in Dad's chair, looking at the ledgers that told our family story in numbers and careful notations. The non-contest clause had done exactly what Dad intended. It revealed Logan's true priorities. Not family, not legacy, not even the $10,000 he just secured. Just the idea of more, always more, no matter the cost. I picked up my great-grandmother's journal again, finding a new passage. The land teaches you patience. Wait long enough and people show you who they really are. Dad had waited, watched, and in the end protected Blake Ridge, the only way he could by giving it to someone who understood that some things matter more than their market value. The first month after Logan signed the papers was surprisingly peaceful. I threw myself into ranch operations, working alongside Miguel to repair winter damage and prep for sieving season. The cattle didn't care about wills or family drama. They just needed tending. There was comfort in that simplicity. Then the bills started arriving. Not new bills, old ones, debts. Logan had apparently incurred using the Blake name promising payment once his inheritance cleared. A $50,000 loan from a private lender for one of his failed ventures. Bar tabs at the country club stretching back years. Even a rental car he abandoned at the Denver airport 6 months ago, racking up daily charges. These aren't your responsibility, Miss Garvey assured me over the phone. Logan signed these contracts, not the estate. But they are using the Blake name. They are calling the ranch threatening liens. Forward everything to me. We'll handle it properly. Properly meant legally. Letters, sent debts, disputed creditors informed that Logan Blake had no ownership interest in Blake Ridge and never had. Some backed off immediately, others required more convincing. I spent my evenings going through Dad's files, finding more evidence of Logan's presumption. Business cards listing him as future proprietor Blake Estates, a website domain he'd registered bligvineyards.com. Even preliminary architectural plans for the event center he'd planned to build where our barns stood. The worst discovery came from Miguel. He found me one morning checking fence lines and pulled me aside. Senator Morgan, there's something you should know. Last year, when your father was very sick, Logan came by while you were at the hospital. My hands tightened on the fence post. What did he do? He brought men with cameras, surveyors. I think they measured everything, took photos, made maps. Logan told me not to mention it to you or Senator Roy. Said it was a surprise for your father. Did he pay you to keep quiet? Miguel looked offended. He tried. I told him, the only Blake I take orders from is the one who signs my checks. That was your father then, and it's you now. I felt a surge of gratitude for this man who'd shown more loyalty to our family than my own brother had. Word spread through our small community that I'd inherited Blake Ridge. Most were supportive ranching families understood that land went to whoever would work it, but some of Logan's potential investors were less understanding. Jim Thornton showed up one Tuesday afternoon, his face red with indignation. Your brother owes me a finder fee. I brought 3 investors to the table based on his guarantee, based on property he didn't own. I interrupted. How much did he take from them? $25,000 each as good faith deposits. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. They want their money back. Then they should talk to Logan or the district attorney. He's disappeared. What return calls? His California office is closed. Of course it was. Logan had always been good at vanishing when consequences came calling. But this time, he'd left a paper trail. I worked with Miss Garvey to compile everything, the forged documents, the unauthorized surveys, the fraudulent deposits. We turned it all over to the authorities, not out of vengeance but necessity. These people deserve their money back, and the only way to ensure that was through proper channels. The local newspaper picked up the story. Blake's development dreams dissolved. They interviewed some of Logan's would investors who painted a picture of elaborate presentations, promised returns, and a charming man who'd seemed so confident about his inheritance. He had it all planned out, one investor told the reporter. Showed us artist renderings, profit projections, said his father was old-fashioned, but would come around. We had no idea. He was already cut out of the will. I refused all interview requests. This wasn't about public vindication, and it was about cleaning up the mess Logan had left behind. 3 weeks into the cleanup, unexpected allies emerged. Ranch families who'd been approached by Logan with buyout offers for their land came forward. He'd been trying to assemble adjacent parcels, promising them positions in his development company once he controlled Blake Ridge. He said you were just temporarily managing things. Tom Riverside told me at the feed store said once he took over, we'd all profit from progress. But my grandfather knew your great-grandmother. She'd roll over in her grave if we carved up this valley for suburbanites. Even the bank president, Harold Morrison, shared his own encounter. Logan came in last spring seeking a development loan, used projected Blake Ridge assets as collateral. I told him to come back with actual ownership documents. He got quite upset, accused me of not having vision. Each story painted the same picture. Logan had been so certain of his inheritance that he'd built an entire house of cards on that assumption, and now it was collapsing, one forged promise at a time. The forensic accountant M.S. Garvey hired found more troubling patterns. Logan had been telling people he was managing Blake Ridge remotely for years, taking credit for its modest profits while painting me as a simple caretaker. Some of his failed businesses had listed Blake Ridge as an asset to secure loans. This goes beyond presumption, Miss Garvey explained during one of our sessions. This is systematic fraud. He's been trading on your father's reputation and your work for years. What do? We protect Blake Ridge. Every false claim gets challenged. Every fraudulent document gets reported. Every debt he tried to attach to this land gets severed. It was exhausting work but necessary, like cleaning out an infected wound. Painful but essential for healing. One morning while sorting through another box of Logan's false promises, I found something different. A letter from Dad sealed, but never sent, addressed to Logan. The date was 2 years before his death. Son, I watch you plan for my death like it's a business opportunity. You measure my land while I measure my remaining days. You see dollars where I see decades of sweat and sacrifice. Your sister thinks I don't know about her visits, your measurements, your meetings with developers. But a man knows when vultures circle. The difference is some circle because they smell death. Others stay to tend the living. You've made your choice. Now I'll make mine, Dad. He'd never sent it. Perhaps he'd hoped Logan would change, would show some genuine care in those final years. Instead, Logan had proven every word true. I filed the letter with the others, evidence of a father's clarity, even in illness. The investigator handling Logan's fraud case was particularly interested in the timeline it established. 2 years of documented deception, he mused. Your brother was quite ambitious. He always was, I said quietly. By the end of the month, I'd settled the legitimate debts, the ones incurred by the ranch, rather than Logan's fantasies. Blake Ridge's reputation emerged intact, even strengthened. Local suppliers appreciated my transparency, my willingness to sort through the mess and make things right. Your father raised you right, Harold Morrison said when I stopped by the bank. Taking responsibility even for things that aren't your fault. That's what real legacy looks like. The county clerk called one afternoon with interesting news. Logan's LLC, Blake Ridge Developments, was being dissolved by court order. All its assets, such as they were, would go toward restitution for his investors. There's not much there, she admitted. Looks like most of the money went to maintaining appearances. Of course it had. Logan had always been good at looking successful. It was being successful that eluded him. That evening, I stood on the porch watching the sunset paint our mountains gold. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, in a way it hadn't been during Logan's visits with their constant talk of change and progress. Miguel joined me carrying 2 cups of coffee. "The land looks good," he said simply, like it knows it's safe now. "From development, maybe there's still the work of running it. See, but that's honest work, the kind that builds something real." I thought about Logan's grand plans, his architectural drawings and profit projections. All that energy spent on imaginary futures while the present, the actual ranch, the actual work had continued without him. My phone buzzed with a text from MS. Garvey, district attorney filing formal charges against Logan. 15 counts of fraud. Thought you should know. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Logan had built his own fate one forged document at a time. I'd simply refused to let him drag Blake Ridge down with him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did on a working ranch. But tonight I stood on my land legally and morally clear, watching the day end over fields that would remain fields, pastures that would remain pastures. Logan had wanted to make Blake Ridge matter in the only way he understood, through profit and progress. But it had always mattered to the cattle that grazed here, the families that worked here, the generations that had built something lasting through patience and daily effort. The cleanup was done. The debts were cleared. The frauds were exposed. Now came the harder work, proving Dad right by keeping Blake Ridge exactly what it had always been, home. The black rental car appeared on the ranch road at 7:15 a.m. on a Thursday, 6 months after Logan had signed away his claims. I recognized it immediately. Same model he always rented, though this time it moved slowly, almost hesitantly, up the gravel drive. I was in the barn checking on a sick calf when Miguel found me. "Your brother is here," he said simply. "He has cameras." My first instinct was to call MS. Garvey, but something made me pause. Logan had parked by the main gate, not presuming to drive onto the property proper. That was new. I found him standing at the fence, a camera crew setting up equipment behind him. He looked different, thinner. His perpetual tan faded, the confident swagger replaced by something I'd never seen in my brother: uncertainty. "Morgan," he said when he saw me approaching. "Thanks, for I wasn't sure you'd come. This is my land, Logan. What are you doing here?" He gestured to the crew documentary about startup failures and family businesses. "They wanted to interview me about everything, and you brought them here." I wanted to tell the truth. The words seemed to surprise him as much as me, about how I screwed up, how I let greed poison everything, how I lost my family over property that was never mine to lose. The camera crew stood awkwardly, clearly sensing the tension. The director, a young woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "We can go somewhere else if no," I said, surprising myself. "If Logan wants to tell the truth, he can tell it here where it happened." For the next hour, I watched my brother do something I'd never seen before: take responsibility. He spoke directly to the camera about his assumptions, his entitlement, his fraud. He didn't minimize or excuse. He even pulled out documents, the real ones this time, showing how he pre-sold property he didn't own. "I told myself I was being visionary," he said, his voice steady but strained, "that I was just being greedy. I saw dollar signs where I should have seen family. I measured profit potential while my sister measured medicine doses." The interviewer asked gentle but probing questions. Logan answered them all, even the uncomfortable ones about the criminal charges, settled with restitution and community service, and his current situation working as a junior sales associate at a real estate firm rebuilding from scratch. Then she turned to me. "Miss Blake, would you like to comment?" I thought about declining. This was Logan's confession, not mine. Of looking at him, really looking at him for the first time in years, I saw something that made me speak. "Our father used to say that land doesn't care about your intentions, only your actions." Logan intended a lot of things, but I was the one who acted, who showed up, who stayed. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I don't forgive him for trying to steal what Dad left me, but I understand why he thought it was his to take. We were raised in a world that told him it was. "Do you think," the interviewer asked carefully, "there's any path forward for your relationship?" Logan and I looked at each other across years of resentment and assumption. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Trust is like fence wire once it's cut. Splicing it back together leaves weak spots. But Maybe I thought about Dad, about family, about the long history of this land. Maybe weak spots are better than no connection at all. The crew filmed some B-roll of the ranch, the mountains, the cattle, the barn Logan had planned to demolish. He watched it all with something like regret, or maybe just recognition of what he'd never really seen before. As they packed up to leave, Logan lingered by the gate. I know I have no right to ask, but could I maybe visit sometime? Not to measure or plan or scheme, just to visit. Fine. He thought for a moment. Because I spent so many years seeing this place as a future asset that I never saw it as a present home. Maybe it's too late, but I'd like to actually see what you and Dad saw. I studied my brother, really studied him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Humility maybe, or just hard-won awareness. Call first, I said finally. And Logan, come to visit your sister, not your missed opportunity. He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. Thank you, Morgan, for everything, even the things that hurt. I watched him drive away, the camera crew following. This time, when the dust settled, it felt less like an ending and more like possibility. Miguel joined me at the gate. That was unexpected. Dad always said people could surprise you if you gave them enough time. You think he's really changed? I thought about Logan's confession, his willingness to document his failures, his request to visit without agenda. I think he's trying. That's more than he ever did before. That evening, I sat in Dad's study updating the ranch ledgers. The numbers told their usual story. Modest profits, careful management, sustainable growth. Nothing like the millions Logan had promised his investors, but real, honest, lasting. I pulled out Dad's letter one more time, reading the words that had changed everything. You'll be taken care of. He'd kept that promise in ways I'd never expected, not just through the will, but through the lessons that made me fight for what was mine, through the patience that let me wait out Logan's schemes, through the love that taught me land was more than its sale price. The phone rang. MS. Barvey calling with news that the last of Logan's fraudulent liens had been cleared. Lake Ridge was free of all claims, all debts, all shadows of what might have been. You did it, she said. You protected your father's legacy. No, I corrected, looking around the study where 5 generations of Blakes had planned and worked and hoped. I just refused to let someone else destroy it. After she hung up, I walked out to the porch. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the ranch in shades of golden amber. The cattle were settling for the night. The land was at peace. I thought about Logan driving back to his small apartment and smaller dreams, about Dad resting in the cemetery on the hill, about myself standing on land that was mine by law, by right, and most importantly by the simple act of staying. He'd raised his glass to toast the house he thought was his. The lawyer opened the envelope, and in the end the only sound was truth delivered in ink and witness signatures. I smiled, raising my coffee mug to the empty chair where Dad used to sit. You were right, old man. I was taken care of, just not the way any of us expected. The mountains held their silence, and that was answer enough. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new chances to prove myself worthy of this inheritance. But tonight, I simply stood on my porch on my land, finally and completely home. The gate was closed. The past was settled and Blake Ridge remained what it had always been, a working ranch, a family legacy, and a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't taken at all. It's simply earned. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about Morgan's journey. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel and hit the like button. And if you want more people to discover this tale of family, inheritance, and true justice, please press the hype button to help spread the word. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you soon. Thanks to all.